Hello and welcome to Monkeys with Fire. So of course tonight we have another Table Talk interview. This time we are going to be speaking with James Baldwin, the designer of The Drowned Earth. Now if you've been following the channel over the past couple of weeks, you'll know that we've been generously supported by The Drowned Earth along with The Army Painter and Serious Play. So tonight it's going to be a great opportunity to ask James lots of questions. We saw Pascal painting up Kalhana on Monday, and you've been watching me making the scenery for our live play of the game, which will be happening on Saturday from 1 o'clock in the afternoon GMT. Welcome, James, to the channel.
Well, thank you very much.
So then, we've got a good audience here tonight who I'm sure have got plenty of questions to ask you about The Drowned Earth. We're all eager to find out more.
Good. I feel like I'm here for a job interview.
Well, I'm sure that the chat will go easy. Don't worry.
That's no fun.
So I thought that maybe the best place to start, before we start talking about the actual game itself, is maybe to get a little bit of an understanding of yourself, maybe a little bit of your background as far as the sort of hobby industry and miniatures and the fantasy setting.
Yep. Okay. Where do I start? Well, couple of milestones, I think. Couple of milestones under the age of 10 years old. I think the first thing that sort of pushed me into the direction of gaming, and I always had my mum read me The Hobbit as a kid. I think maybe 6 or 7, somewhere around that age. And then at just the end of primary school, so around 9, 10 years old, that sort of age, we were passing around old school fighting fantasy books. Some of the sort of classic choose your own adventure, Jackson and Livingston stuff. So that really kind of primed me for role-play gaming and miniatures gaming. And then I don't even remember how, but I discovered a White Dwarf magazine somewhere, again I think being passed around at school, and that was sort of like opening the suitcase full of gold. It was like, what is this stuff? Little painted people, amazing. And I don't remember which issue it was, but I remember it was back in the days of when there was still Marauder miniatures. Like Citadel weren't the only company making. I think they were a subsidiary actually, but they weren't the only people making models for Warhammer. And as kids, we couldn't really afford enough models for a kind of mass battle game. So I've still got it somewhere in my grandmother's handwriting, God bless her. We wrote our own rule system, but what we could afford to do was play the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay game, 2nd edition, if I remember rightly. And that was a lot of fun. And then, it sort of all spiraled out of control from there. Playing various things, like sort of on a bit of a nostalgia kick. We were playing Space Marine. We actually never played all that much Warhammer 40,000, but some fantasy, and then all the peripheral games, Blood Bowl, and that sort of stuff. And then aged, I guess, about 16, 17, I decided that girls definitely would not like me if I painted little toy men. And I was right. So I sort of fell out of it all. Although I kept on. I've always run a sort of a Star Wars sort of play-by-post forum for it's a role-play game effectively, but it's more like interactive storytelling. Really. And so I sort of kept in touch with it and kept in touch with my writing that way. And I've always been, unashamedly into sci-fi literature and films and, fantasy literature and films and that sort of thing. And then I decided, aged about 30, that I turned into a boring person. I don't know what the Twitch stream rules are on language, but I was about to describe myself in slightly more colourful terms. I'd become boring and didn't have any hobbies and worked all the time, so got back into RPGs and wargaming, and a lot of board games and card games, and nowadays I feel like we're really living in the kind of the golden age of all of that stuff, really. How I ever ended up actually designing a game, I have no idea. Who would choose to do such an insane thing?
Well, that's got to be the next question, and really, hasn't it?
I don't really know. I think there were a couple of seminal moments of everyone who plays games has got an idea for a game in their head, and I had various different ideas I've always been a sort of creative person and looking for creative outlets and things like that. So I got involved in a few design projects with other people. One of them was I played back to Lord of the Rings. Before its resurgence, I was very keen on the Games Workshop Lord of the Rings strategy battle game, which then became the Hobbit strategy battle game, and I was involved in the design process for very unofficial, again, before Games Workshop had taken any interest in reviving the game, really, Battle Companies, which is a kind of squad-based campaign system, something a little bit like Necromunda or Mordheim or that kind of thing, where you buy your little dudes and your little dudes level up over the course of a number of games, and you can buy equipment and all of that sort of stuff, and that was a lot of fun. It was also a little bit frustrating at times, and I decided that if I was ever going to do anything like that again, I would be better off just taking on my own project where I had complete creative control, and it gave me an opportunity to world build, which is what I'd always really loved and wanted to do, but at the same time not really had any focus or reason to do that. And so it's one of those things that a number of times in the past I'd done a little bit of world building, and but without any practical application for that world. I never stuck at it, but as soon as I'd got the idea for the Drowned Earth game, in fairness, the game and the world really went hand in hand together.
Can you actually remember what that moment was, or what sort of inspired that thought?
No, because it's very it built up gradually over time, and it was the culmination of a lot of different sort of both adult and childhood interests, a lot of film influences and that sort of thing. And really, I started off with the idea of, from a game design perspective, I wanted to make a game that had a reaction mechanic and had lots of really engaging cinematic gameplay, and where the mechanics of the game encouraged storytelling with these little story moments in every game, but the reaction mechanics are somewhat complicated, and they bring up, particularly if you want to have quite a free-flowing game with lots of freedom, that will bring up 1,000,001 different rules conflicts and complications, and that sort of thing. So trying to find a way to have that kind of reaction mechanic, but also keep it streamlined, keep it focused, keep it both broad in terms of what your possibilities, what you can do in the game, but narrow in terms of your how easy the game is to remember and your specific sort of order of play. So that it was, I think, quite a challenge. Post-apocalypse immediately came to me because the other part of that whole sort of design brief was that I love terrain. I'm a big terrain builder, and I also felt that it was really a missed opportunity. There aren't too many games that really interact with their scenery, where you can think in a much more three-dimensional way, where people can really climbing and jumping and swimming and those sorts of things aren't an afterthought, but they are a core aspect of how you move around the board. And so trying to find a way to create a movement system which would encourage a different type of thinking, a more three-dimensional type of thinking from the player. I felt that would be interesting, and that all those two design goals don't necessarily go hand in hand. It was probably going to be quite a challenge to find a way to fit them together in a way that still worked and was free-flowing, easy to remember. But the scenery aspect then became essential. Post-apocalypse, I've always had these sort of visions. There are actually, I can name a few. There's that scene in Star Wars where you've got the Massassi ruins, which I think are filmed in Mexico. You've got the sort of the rebel guard up a pole, sort of staring out at the is it an X-wing? It's Luke in an X-wing, isn't it? Landing, and you've got those ruins in the background.
Nobody knows how he got into that little thing because there's no ladders. It's the thinnest.
yeah, absolutely.
How did he get in there?
Well, he used the Force, obviously. But yeah, that was definitely one. I was lucky enough to visit Cambodia and go to see the ruins in Angkor Wat, and that was also a big influence. And it's just always occurred to me that with post-apocalyptic things, you always see this kind of post-nuclear desert wasteland, but that's really not the way the apocalypse would really be. Things grow, and that's not necessarily shying away from the idea that the apocalypse was caused by nuclear war. On the drowned Earth, nobody knows what it was caused by. Maybe it was that, but maybe it wasn't. Either way, if you look at photographs of Chernobyl, they're not desert wasteland. They're verdant growth, and the plants have overtaken all those buildings, and you've got trees going out of cracks in windows and all kinds of crazy stuff. And it's always been an aesthetic which has stayed with me, that kind of nature reclaiming what man's former domain, and sort of nature eternal and enduring. Sort of quite a powerful image, I think. Yeah.
Of course, when I first saw the imagery on the website, I think that was my real first introduction. And of course, you see the characters I think it's in a boat, and there's these skyscrapers, and the water has obviously risen up many, many levels. And I instantly thought of I think it was a PlayStation 2, no, an Xbox game, Odyssey, Journey to the West.
Yeah. I actually played a couple of levels while I was working on Drowned Earth. Somebody suggested that game to me, and I think it's a retelling of the Monkey King story. I didn't play through all of it, but I played a couple of levels just to get some visual influence. And another big one was The Last of Us.
Yes.
Again, sort of northern hemisphere rather than the tropics, but it's definitely got the right feel.
Yeah, definitely. And so from so here you are, you've got this idea in your mind, and obviously you're wanting to get it down onto paper as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that sort of process. What were the first sort of steps, near enough, what did you first, page one, what did you write? Was it The Drowned Earth? Did you have the title already in your mind, or were you laying down mechanics to which it evolved into the game? How did it come about?
Well, you've just reminded me that I've kind of glossed over one of the most important starting points, which is one of my favorite sort of hard sci-fi novels, which is called The Drowned World by J.G. Ballard, and that tells a story set in a future Earth, which is, I think it's set in the 80s and written in the 60s or something like that. I don't remember exactly. but that again, we're returning to a tropical sort of primordial Earth, where the sea levels have risen, and the cities of Europe are all lagoon networks. It's the influence for the the Five Lakes District and the Great Lagoon Network, which are parts of Ulaya, so I didn't have a working title for quite some time. The working title was The Drowned World, and I thought of all sorts of other different titles, and eventually just thought, well, actually, The Drowned Earth is quite a good one. It's near to the original influence. I mean, it has to be said that the world of J.G. Ballard's novel is nothing like Ulaya, except very superficially. So the geographical conditions might be somewhat similar, and that's about it. But it's a great book. I can really recommend it to anyone. He's sort of talking about this sort of strange situation where people are kind of they've got some kind of genetic memory from creatures that were used to be millions of years ago, our sort of primordial ancestors, and both people and animals are kind of not in a kind of weird mutant way, but people and animals are regressing into a more sort of Cretaceous mindset, and that there's some sort of spiritual thing going on. It's very, very interesting. But that I realised that's a huge tangent and not what you asked at all.
But it's fascinating. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Again, everybody in the chat now is that's required reading to check out that novel. You've got to check out Journey to the West, the Odyssey game on the Xbox 360. This is all good material.
Well, J.G. Ballard, not a lot of people know his work. He's a sort of British science fiction author writing in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But the story of Empire of the Sun was written by him and is semi-autobiographical. He is effectively the main character. He was born in China in the colonial period, and in the Second World War, he and his family were interred in a camp. And that film is basically it's not entirely historically accurate, but it's his life. And he also wrote Crash, which they made into a big film in the 90s. So a lot of people are familiar with J.G. Ballard's work without knowing him necessarily.
Is Empire of the Sun is it the Christian Bale, Steven Spielberg?
Right. Yeah, that's right. So Christian Bale basically played H.G. Ballard. Right.
Oh wow.
So now back to what you actually asked me though, is what's day one? So the title was definitely not day one, but the starting point for the world building, as I say, it was a culmination of a lot of different things, but really the sort of platform from which I built was the Drowned World. And then as far as the rules are concerned, I mean, basically, world building wise, I just decided I was much cooler when I was 9 years old than I was when I was 29. And I remembered all the things I liked, which were, jungle ruins and explorers and archaeology. I did an archaeology degree, actually, and dinosaurs. And how can we find a way to mix all these things together and put them in a crazy post-apocalyptic, sea levels risen tropical world?
Because how can anything fail if it's got dinosaurs in it?
Well, exactly. Dinosaurs and extremely brightly coloured foliage was sort of where I was going. So I had a very strong visual image and a very strong idea about what I wanted to do mechanically as well. And as far as the actual game is concerned, there are sort of, I guess, two aspects to beginning the design process. Number one, you have to define your terms in kind of in terms of what's financially possible, what's realistic, what's a good idea commercially for a game, because of course, as much as it's a labor of love, it still needs to be commercially viable, otherwise it's not going to last. So that was very easy. Skirmish scale miniatures game seemed like the obvious choice there, and I was adamant from the start that I don't want to be one of these companies that says skirmish scale, but then later on down the line you find yourself needing like 30 models on the battlefield. I think anyone who's played the game and really got excited about dinosaurs and tried to cram in as many as possible has worked out by now that the game really starts to slow down after about 15 models. And I think the sweet spot is somewhere between 8 and 12. That gives you enough scope that you've got lots of cool little dinosaurs to play with and a decent backbone of characters. But it doesn't get ungainly, and it isn't too quick and too over too quickly. So yeah, defining terms, working out what am I going to be able to produce commercially, what can I afford in terms of being able to commission sculpts. And so then I wrote myself a clear sort of box that I needed to design within, if that makes sense, just from a purely practical point of view. And then I just went on a wish list. What are the things that I like in games? What are the things that I want to see? Really. After writing a long wish list, and that wish list constantly was having things crossed out and added to it. Once you've gone on the wish list, then it's a question, I think, of working out what's really the heart of the game. What's the so, for example, if you were making a Jurassic Park game, what's the heart of Jurassic Park? Well, it's man's hubris, isn't it? Really, all of that story is about the fact that nature will find a way, but man is arrogant enough to think that he can control it, and he's going to get a T-Rex to the face as a lesson that he can't. So that's that, and Drowned Earth. That. In fact, I don't want to say too much about what I think really the heart of the Drowned Earth is. I want to let people discover that for themselves, but I had very firm ideas about what I thought it was, what I wanted to communicate, both in artistically but mechanically. I think it's a bit easier to work out, and I've covered a lot of the ground. It's about having a very fluid movement system and getting up into that terrain, and the terrain being really relevant to the game, and creating a game that gives you those cinematic moments, and overriding all of that, really having a kind of a system of play which allows you to interact tactically with the battlefield, not the rulebook. So I was constantly streamlining all the way through. So I effectively wrote down my terms and conditions. What's the heart of this game? What do I want people to experience while they're playing it? And then move all of that to one side and start iterating, start writing down rules, start thinking of ways to solve the obvious problems of miniature wargaming, of range and movement and shooting, and how you mitigate damage and all of those kinds of things, and then keep on referring back to sheet number one and saying, okay, am I doing what my design brief says I should be doing? Does this serve the overall purpose? And if it doesn't, however good it is, get rid of it. I think I can't remember where I read it, but I definitely remember reading something. It might have been an article about game design or other kinds of design called "Kill Your Children." Slightly awful title, but the idea of it is that it can be great and you can love it, but it still doesn't need to be there. You can save it for another game. Really, I think designing good games is about being very focused on what you're trying to achieve, what you want, and making sure that you're constantly serving the greater goal and not going on a vanity project of, but that's really cool, so it's got to be in there.
I remember watching a interview with Peter Jackson, the director of The Lord of the Rings, and he was explaining how, if you think of the actual story with all the characters, how it meanders massively to and fro, left and right.
Yeah.
And as a film, in the editing process, if it doesn't stay with Frodo and Sam, it's like an elastic band to either side. Pull it back in, keep on pulling it back in, stay on that central line.
I think you can get away with so much more in a novel than you can a film. And even I think it's worth pointing out that Tolkien wasn't a professional writer. He was doing it as a hobby. He was also used to reading the Poetic Eddas and the Icelandic sagas and Beowulf and what have you, which really do not follow a 3-part film structure at all. And so I sort of make excuses for him, but I also think that we won't talk about the 3 films set in the same universe that don't actually exist. But the original Lord of the Rings films, I think that he made some great cutting choices and combining of characters and deciding to skip bits out. He really got it right. And I think, that's really a great example of killing your children. All of the, I love Tom Bombadil. It's a great section in the book. Sometimes I just go to those books and I'll just read those couple of chapters. But it doesn't need to be there.
Yeah,
it really
doesn't serve the plot, doesn't move the story along, does it really?
Yeah, exactly.
Jock's just saying, the game is awesome, I love it. So you're getting some positive love in your direction here?
Well, Jock was one of the guys who was actually, I have to correct you, it's Yoka, I think.
I do apologise. Everybody on the channel knows I get names completely wrong.
So he is one of the gene splicers from the Kickstarter. So he did a special pledge level where you could design your own character, and so he is the brainchild. His brainchild is Blue Wing, the sort of dueling crossbow bird with metal wings, because he doesn't have real wings. And I was lucky enough. He's been very, very supportive from day one of the Kickstarter, really. And I was lucky enough to meet him in Essen. And without asking him to, he just volunteered to hang around and talk German to anyone who who wasn't so comfortable, listening to me blather on loudly in English. So thank you to him on many different levels. But it was great to meet him at Essen.
Oh, excellent. And in fact, when we did the product showcase and we were doing the unboxing, and we looked at Blue Wing, and we actually asked that question as we were discovering the character. It's like, hey, hang on a second, he looks like a bird, but these wings are mechanical. Oh, and so we started thinking, well, what was the story behind where did it come from? Have they evolved and hence lost their wings, and he's harking back to days gone by of their race or something like that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's always nice when you've got a character that has that little bit of background story of, wanting to fly but not being able to, and trying to, find a way around that. And then you, as a designer, try and find a way to represent that mechanically in the game. So if you look at Blue Wing special rules, it represents that idea that he doesn't flap those wings and travel too far, but he can certainly use them to glide and leap off the edge of buildings and bridge gaps a little bit more easily than a lot of other characters.
Right. So this sort of leads me on then, because my sort of background, similar to yourself, was a lot of Games Workshop, and I was playing my 40k and my big armies. And then, of course, I moved on, as you do, and you get jobs and life takes over. But as I've come back, skirmish games have now definitely come to the forefront. And what I've really enjoyed about them is that it's the opportunity to present unique characters. Which, of course, from a painting challenge, that's great, because it's a different model every time. You're not just knocking out a load of soldiers in repetitive colour schemes. So tell us, I mean, I've just found out now, which I wasn't aware of, that it was obviously a backer who has created one character. I'm assuming that you created the others. What was the sort of process on that, and do you have a favourite character?
So I've just seen in the chat that Justin Cader is also there. He's the guy behind Wishbone, who's the leader of the Wayfarers. So actually, the Wayfarers faction, there are 6 of them, but the 5 which come in the starter box are all created by Kickstarter backers.
Oh wow!
So they're and you know it made sense to make them the mercenary faction so that you can use them alone, or you can break them up and use them with any other faction as well. And so that was a lot of fun, but to work with other people's ideas and have creative input into this world that I'd created, and it was sort of really satisfying to see. It was actually really I was. Have I ever said this publicly? Bit of a secret. I was actually dreading it because I was thinking, oh God, are people going to have all these really gauche ideas and I'm going to have to try and rein them in, or I'm going to be committed to this awful thing? Everyone's ideas were great, and I really enjoyed the process of coming to. Everybody came with a kernel of an idea, but and the people that some people had a more developed idea, and some of the people that only had a kernel of an idea were really eager to work with me to create a character, sort of thing. So there was at no stage was anybody kind of dictating something that I didn't want to see in the game, which was my fear, and was really gratifying and really nice. But as far as the other characters are concerned, so how many do we have now? It's quite a few. I think we're over 30 now, of which 5 are Kickstarter backers, 25 are original and my concepts, and then we've got another 3 new characters with this next wave, plus Liana, who also belongs to the Wayfarers faction. She's also a mercenary. She doesn't come in the starter box. She's separate, but she was created by all of the backers. So we did a little choose your own adventure story following what was at first just a blank slate of a character with no information, and we, over the course of the Kickstarter, we ran a number. I wrote a little bit of story and a question to say to people, what should this person do? Should they do X, Y, or Z? And in that process of running through this little story, we worked out the gender, the species, the sort of capabilities, and weapon loadouts and that sort of stuff of the character. So that was also a lot of fun. As far as the characters that I created are concerned, I don't have a process, really. It's mostly just waiting to find inspiration and furiously writing notes on the tube on my phone when I suddenly come up with a good idea. There are a certain amount of influences from, media, films, that sort of thing that I like. So Kaneda isn't based on, but there's certainly some influence from a character from a Kurosawa film, and I think it's either Yojimbo or Sanjuro, and I think it's Yojimbo. The villain is a samurai who's got a Smith & Wesson revolver, and he's sort of got it tucked into his kimono, and certainly you don't find enough about that character to say that Kaneda was based on him, but certainly there's that little influence there, and lots of other influences. So with some of the characters I had a starting point, with some of the characters I incorporated ideas that I like, either from popular culture or ideas that I'd come to myself. But yes, I'm afraid not. At the moment, that there is a little bit more of a process because I'm now slightly constrained. Yeah, I guess a little bit constrained by what the game needs. Right. And so I feel like if I'm creating a new character for the Artifactors, what is the character of the Artifactors? What's their play style? And what can I give them that's useful to them but doesn't water down that unique character, if that makes sense.
And am I right in thinking, is it Ando?
Yeah.
Because he's on the pre-order, isn't he? Oh! There he is.
There he is. Can we?
Yeah. That's.
Will it do that? Yeah.
Yeah, that's
kind
good.
of. But yeah, there he is. Yeah. So the pre-orders. Ando is so this wave is about finding things that the existing factions don't have, but need. So whereas normally the characters, the new releases for each faction will be representative of that faction's playstyle, I also want, in time when there's a wider range, for people to be able to choose different ways to play the different factions. And so we're giving each faction with this wave a little bit of contingency, something that they're not typically good at, and that they won't get lots of models that are good at this thing, but it's giving them some ability to kind of, steer in that direction more. And with Ando, it's close combat. Artifactors typically, Sage isn't bad. Other than that, most other artifactors are fairly rubbish in close combat, or at least deal very low damage. And Ando is pretty much the opposite of that. His weapon is called a Dino Chopper, and so he, with his little grappling gun, he pretty much just sort of shoots a T-Rex in the shoulder, hoists himself up via the grappling gun and thumps it in the face. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to people playing with that, because the rules for it are really quite fun. It makes some crazy situations. His shtick is that basically if the model that he's shot with his grappling gun is the same size as him, the same base size, then he'll drag it towards him, and if it's bigger, then he will get dragged towards it, and it counts as a charge. So yeah, lots of fun. But yeah, so this wave, I came to it, in fact, there's something else I can show you. I came to it a little bit late in the process. I'm going to be a bit more organized with wave 2, but it occurred to me that actually every wave, all of the models will be individually available for people who just have one faction and they want the new model for that faction. But anybody who does have more, has we put out a sort of pre-order, so people can pre-order all 5 of the releases at once. But I thought it would be a nice idea to package them in a kind of scenario pack. So effectively, this is the Wave 1 scenario pack with all 6 models, all 5 releases in that scenario pack. And in that, you also get a special scenario. This one's just a QR code at the moment that I've got my finger over it because it hasn't been uploaded yet. In future, we'll actually have a physical copy of the scenario itself. Maybe even more than one scenario, who knows? But for the moment, the Wave 1, anybody ordering the pre-order or after the pre-order, you'll still be able to buy the scenario pack for a limited time only. We'll have a special scenario in it involving all of the models, and so you can play it anything from 2 to 4 player. This scenario, which is a little bit unusual, a little bit different. It's one of the reasons why there's a QR code, because there are going to be a few rules stipulations which I think people are going to be really excited to have, because one of the questions that I get asked quite a lot is, can you play it more than 2 player? And the answer is there is zero contingency in the rule book to do that. But I have played Drowned Earth 4 player, and it's crazy fun and really stupid 4 player. This scenario will show you how part of the scenario special rules will be how to handle a 4 player, effectively how to handle initiative and activations in a 4 player game. And you can use them beyond this scenario and play normal games like that as well.
Right, that's interesting. Because, of course, as you know, I am going to be doing a live playthrough of the Drowned Earth on Saturday. And my sort of idea was to allow the chat to basically be a neutral sort of faction within the game, and that they would control the dinosaurs.
Yeah,
so
that's great.
I've got my friends playing against one another, but I thought that the chat could just get involved and just decide who do you want to chomp at?
What I would suggest in that case is that you, while I don't know if you've got a hand free while you're filming, but you roll a 3rd initiative die to work out at what stage the dinosaurs go.
Okay, no, that's good. I'll take the advice of the designer on that one.
I think it'll work.
Yeah. Hey,
I haven't done it, but
yeah, well, we'll have a go. I just think it would be interesting to get the chat involved, and they can just chomp on some heads at some point. Hopefully, we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, cause a bit of chaos. So another design conflict that I had is that typically the more crazy random fun you add to the game, the more narrative it is, the more story you get to tell, and lots of really cool and fun things happen. But those sorts of things interfere with balance. And so what I was quite insistent on was that the basic rule set itself should be completely balanced, and that any optional narrative rules which then can potentially unbalance the game are entirely optional. So you've got a core mechanic which is ready to be played in a tournament, and nobody's going to get too sore because a dinosaur jumps out and eats their star character, but that when people want to play much more sort of casual narrative games, that they can do that as well.
Yeah, I think we're definitely going for the cinematic version on Saturday.
Good to hear it, yeah.
Well, again, it's the first time playing, so it's getting used to it, and it's going to be good fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm a big advocate of the fact that you shouldn't tell other people how to play with their toys, and if people want to take a very serious competitive attitude to their games, then they should be allowed to do that. And if they then instead want to play much more narrative and free form games, they should be able to do that as well. It's nobody else's business but yours.
Yeah. So before, you were talking about you sort of in the design process, you'd put together this box and you'd got your wish list of ideas going into this box, but you were quite brutal to yourself and said, no, these have got to be cut out because stay on focus, stay on target. Yeah. Were there some ideas in there that, even though you've edited them and for the benefits of the game, but you go, oh, I really wish that maybe, I could have found a way of squeezing that in? Is there anything an idea that you could share with us, that it was something that was on the cutting room floor, but you really like that idea?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number, and I think one of the big ones is cavalry models. Now, the rules for cavalry models weren't necessarily pared down. And the reason for that is that when you're already talking about a game with reactions where you can, somebody in reaction can shoot you and you can shoot them back, and you have to have a very set order for when do you assign wounds, when do you roll the dice, when do you declare what it is you want to do. And then you bring in the added complication of somebody being able to jump off the back of their mount, their dino dude, or in the case of cough cough, this guy, he's on the wrong base, by the way, just for future reference. This is a 40, it should be a 50mm base, but it was painted by Angel Giraldez, and he's done a fantastic job. But bless him, he did put it on the wrong base, so I'm going to have to hack that apart very, very carefully and nervously and do a shoddy job on rebasing it. But I wanted to. There are a number of sort of cinematic things. Like, it would be really cool if a dinosaur could run off in one direction and charge one person, while the mounted rider could leap off the back and leap into combat directly with someone else, and at the same time. So that's an example of something. It would be awesome. It would be really cool, but it really does upset the kind of set order of doing things, and it compromises the way in which you need to have a very clear way of doing things in order that there's no ambiguity and no questions in a competitive environment of who should be doing what first, and what happens if you kill the rider before he dismounts, and that sort of stuff. Right. I'm sort of garbling it, but it all needs to be really, really clear. And that was something which I just couldn't find a clear way of doing that wasn't incredibly complicated. And to be honest, the mounted rules are already edging towards the complicated. So yeah, streamlining always. Cutting room floor is absolutely filled with cool ideas that just made things messy.
Okay. So obviously this new wave is filling in some of the gaps of abilities on the various factions.
Yeah.
Are you ever thinking of other factions? Is that something that might happen in the future? Maybe.
I've certainly got lots of ideas for other factions, it's breadth versus depth, isn't it? I think at the moment the priority is to create depth and to make sure that all of the existing factions have a good amount of list building options and different ways to put a crew together. So we will definitely be having other leaders for each of the factions at some stage in the future that will have their own leader rules. So each leader, for people that don't play the game, every leader has a leader card, which is actually double-sided usually, which gives them a specific ability. And so you get a choice of which ability you want to use in a given game. We're going to be releasing some more of those leader cards, but also new leaders. And the leader cards will sometimes be interchangeable. So if you look at the existing ones, you'll see some of them say Canada only. And obviously that means only Canada can use that. But they don't all say that. And so there might be a firm card in the future which doesn't have that restriction that any firm leader can employ. And so there'll be a certain amount of mixing and matching of leaders with different abilities. And usually the abilities affect the whole crew. So, for example, Nyx she has two sides to her leader ability card. The Nyx only side is fire arrows. So she can shoot her arrows and set people on fire, which is good but selfish. And the team player choice, she can give all artifactors +1 to their dodge move, which is particularly important for artifactors because they're a little bit squishy. They quite like to dodge. Additionally, a lot of them have got an ability called Run and Gun, which gives them a free dodge move after they successfully shoot. And so having that extra movement means that they've got a whole lot more scope to shoot somebody and then without spending another activation, nip into cover so that they can't get shot back again. So there are lots of things like that, and new models bringing new tactical options, new ideas for the faction. Again, keeping the character, the unique character of each faction, but maybe giving you several different play styles within that character. So I think at the moment the priority is to make sure that there are lots of tactical and list building opportunities within each existing faction before we start to add a lot of new factions.
Okay. Burson is saying additional leaders for existing factions could certainly alter the play style of the factions and give players the opportunity to discover more uses for their existing models.
Yeah, that's exactly the idea. The idea is that in the future, the different leaders will kind of change the paradigm of the faction a little bit, so that you can play them one style or you can play them another style. But within the broad character of the artifactors are always going to be the fast, mobile, agile people, whereas the bondsmen are always going to be the close combat specialists. You know, you might be able to play a shootier version of the bondsman, or you might be able to play a close combat version of the bondsman, which are a little bit lighter on armor and a bit more agile, but a bit squishier, so slightly more glass cannony. Or you can go for the slower, heavily armored ones, or mix and match between them. But certainly the idea of those leader ability cards is that they will allow you to kind of min-max a little bit on those choices.
Okay, excellent. And so I've got to ask, when are we getting a T-Rex?
Well, really good question. I really want to make a T-Rex model. The challenge is that it would have to be like 200 millimeters long or something for it to be to scale.
That's okay.
It's okay for you. You don't have to pay to make the thing. I am looking into ways of making bigger models which are more affordable, and that means resin basically, and it means spin cast resin. That's a little bit fraught, and I don't want to talk about it too much because I can't make any promises. You know, one of the difficulties of being a kind of a new company is that you have all these ideas, but they're just not always going to be you're not always going to be able to afford them. And I'm not just talking about money, it's also time. And it's also the fact that as you learn where you are in the marketplace and you learn what the customers want and you learn the way that the game is being played, sometimes the ideas that you had yesterday don't seem as attractive as the ideas that you had today. And so I don't want to sort of overcommit, if you know what I mean, to promises that I'm then going to disappoint people by not keeping. And so really big dinos is one of those things that I'm looking at it to see whether it's viable or not. I really hope it will be. I'd like to be able to do something like that. But I think what we are going to get is dinos which are maybe somewhere in the mid-range, so bigger than the existing Utahraptors, but not quite a sort of massive slab of metal or resin, you know, T-Rex style. So, you know, and it's not like in the fossil record there aren't loads of options. So, you know, watch out for that. There are definitely going to be some 50 mil base size dinos, okay. You know, coming out next year probably.
So I mean, but I'm going to stay on this point for a second. So you said obviously there's a sort of financial sort of aspect to it. Is there a rules aspect to it as well? Is that a consideration? Would the big models affect how the game plays? I assume it must do.
Yeah, well, one of the things is, I mean, you can't really imagine a T-Rex climbing up a rope ladder. Or from leaping from one sort of rickety skyscraper to the next. You can with a Utahraptor, you know, and we're already kind of fudging a little bit, you know, the idea of them jumping up to a second story and sort of scrabbling up the wall. I can kind of envisage that, and it kind of works. But something like a T-Rex, it does, you know, they're fast and ground-based and not super mobile in that way. So there's definitely a challenge of how do you restrict them in terms of their movement within the existing rules while still making them useful. And you know, one of the ways I think of doing that is that if you've got a T-Rex which is, you know, 2 stories high or whatever, you know, at least leaning into the first story, then they should probably be able to attack models which are not in base-to-base contact with them in the traditional way, and maybe in base-to-base contact. You know, there's a diagram in the rulebook basically expanding on the idea of being base-to-base contact while you're at different levels,
right?
But it's talking about small models. So I think there's probably a way of expanding that so that you can get attacked by a T-Rex while you're crossing your rope bridge while it's standing on the ground, that sort of thing. But also the other aspect is, you know, you're talking about dense terrain and the T-Rex won't always fit through. And I know immediately people say things like, you know, oh, that's really cool because you could have him knocking buildings over and stuff. And yeah, that is really cool. And definitely things like that need to happen. But again, we're back to that difficulty of trying to maintain a rule set which is versatile enough to incorporate lots of rule of cool stuff, but also be quite strict and quite controlled in terms of competitive play. And so, there are practical considerations in tournaments of, you can't really expect people to replace buildings with, rubble in a tournament environment and that sort of stuff. So again, that's why I was really pleased when one of the big stretch goals on the Kickstarter for me was getting the the optional rules chapter in the hard copy of the rulebook, because it allowed me to do all of the. In fact, that a lot of stuff that ended up on the cutting room floor was then reused and hoovered up and used in the alternate rules chapter. Then we could do things like swing points, where you've got a token in one part of the board and a token in the other part of the board, and you number them 1 and 2, 1 on one side, 2 on the other side. You move into close combat with it. You move into base-to-base contact with it, and you roll the dice, and then you swing from point 1 to point 2, and then you flip them. So one records where now the rope or the vine is. It's not here, it's here, and then you can swing back and that kind of stuff. And then allowing models to shoot the terrain that you're standing on, some rickety bridge or some sort a ruined third story, and instead of shooting you, your opponent shoots the floor and it gives way under you and you take falling damage. Again, those are things which aren't really, it's not really possible to do that in a neat and tidy way, which is fair and balanced. But for two people who just want to do a whole load of crazy, unbalanced, fun stuff and tell a great story, or in the future for some of the narrative scenarios that I've been looking at writing, and all the scenarios I write are narrative to some degree, but I'm thinking about much more of a campaign system with like super narrative things going on. That's where all of those things can come into play, and T-Rex is knocking over buildings and that sort of thing.
I mean, Burson's just said those rules are absolutely cool, so cinematic, and that's exactly what I was just about to say. The pictures in my mind are already, brilliant. But you just said campaign.
I did, yeah. So that's, again, I've already said, as a small company, you should be very careful about what you say, because you don't always have the ability to follow through with everything that you're planning at the time. I do not know when, but I think I can probably say hand on heart, there's definitely going to be a campaign system for the game at some stage. It's something that is being worked on, albeit slowly. At the moment, it's also something that I am not going to release until it's right. So there won't be a kind of half-baked version of it. We're not going to rush it out to meet some kind of Kickstarter goal, deadline, or anything like that. I'm going to work on it until I think it's great, and then when I think it's great, we're going to look at how to get it into people's hands. And maybe that'll be a Kickstarter, maybe it will just be a standalone product. I'm not sure, but it's definitely the ideas that I have for the campaign system are things which I don't think have been done in miniature gaming before. It's a proper campaign system, not what a lot of games call a campaign system, but is actually a league system. So that kind of, and no disrespect to these games, one of my, I think probably one of the best games, if not the best game Games Workshop ever produced, is Blood Bowl. And there's nothing is more fun than a Blood Bowl league or cup. But all of those sorts of games suffer from a snowball effect problem, basically, where the person who wins this first game gets a bunch of XP, can level up their models, make them stronger, which makes them more likely to win the second game, which they then do, which makes them more likely to win the third. And then usually by the third or fourth round, there are a couple of teams that are pretty much unbeatable by, all but the top set. And so you end up with a kind of stratification within the league, which when it's a sports game is absolutely fine. That's the way it should work, because it's actually emulating real life. But when it comes to a kind of miniature game campaign, I think that's not a desirable thing. And so I'm looking at ways around that, and I think one of the best ways around that is looking differently at the way that you are rewarded for winning, making the campaign very narrative and making your rewards more narrative than practical. Everybody levels up, everybody gets to improve their dudes, everybody gets experience for playing the game, and everybody comes away with better people and also little story elements as well. But the rewards might be things which will which you don't even know what they do until several games along. And so I think actually one of the best ways of controlling that and making it really a really rich narrative experience is making the campaign a 2-player experience.
Right. Okay. Just looking at the chat here, there is talk about you should make a Mega Piranha terrain piece. And then someone's asking, I think more seriously, are there any plans for official terrain?
Mega piranhas are one of the things in the alternate rules chapter that you can designate certain areas of the board where if you swim in them, and it's called the drowned earth, so there has to be a fair amount of water kicking around on the board, right? Certainly the official map that we've had made with Deep Cut Studios has a bunch of water on it. Official terrain is something that I have been trying to work on for quite some time. It's not the easiest thing, because laser cutting companies are always very busy and they've got a number of different priorities. I think I might. I don't want to speak prematurely because I've said this many times in the past. I've had a bunch of yeses from companies which have turned to nothing, but I think I might now, thanks to Essen, actually be working with a company that's actually going to make it happen. So we'll have to wait and see about that. But my ideal is that when people say, what terrain do I need for this game, I can point at a commercially available product, perhaps not sold by me, but sold by a third-party company under a licensing agreement, where I can say, this is official, it's sanctioned, it has been designed with my eye on it, making sure that it's suitable for the game and that the density of terrain is correct and the scale of the terrain is right. And a sort of modular product where you can make lots and lots of different setups with it, but within a kind of safety zone of this is the right amount of terrain to use and the right kind of terrain as well.
Excellent, that sounds good. I'm just looking again, Saberwolf, when we were talking about the rule book and the extended sort of additional rules, just said, remind me to order a rule book, gotta get all the alt rules. So,
well, tell him he's got to use your discount code that I gave you, right? I've forgotten what it is, but yeah.
Well, there we go then. So that's actually a good prompt. So yes, for anybody, to some degree, I assume that everybody who's on this chat have already got all the models because they're obviously massive fans of the game. But for anybody who is missing something from the complete collection of The Drowned Earth, if you type in !The Drowned Earth, that will give you the link to the website. It will also give you a 10% discount code. Now that code is valid until the end of the month, and it is not valid on the pre-order models that are being advertised. So it's all the existing range. So
yeah, the reason for that is that the pre-order models are already discounted. So they will work. It will work on the Terrain 1 pack after the pre-order period is over, which is next week, I think. I need to look at the exact date, but I have a feeling it might be Wednesday of next week. But then they'll go up to the regular retail price, in which case the discount code will be applicable. But the idea is just that the way the software works is that you can't use multiple discounts on the same product effectively.
Okay. So exclamation, the drowned earth. Gonna get your dinos a little bit cheaper? Because you can never have too many dinos.
Not to mention playing a crazy King of Tartuffe scenario. So shall I say a little bit about the scenario?
No, these guys don't want to know about it. I'm sure.
I think you're right. Yeah. Moving swiftly on. The clue's in the name. Actually, if you've ever played a dice game by Richard Garfield, the designer of Magic the Gathering, who's one of my game design heroes, then he's also made a game with the words "King of" in it. And so if you imagine it's a King of the Hill style game, and there's one model in the scenario pack which might spring to mind when you think of somebody big standing in the middle getting hit by everyone else. It's a King of the Hill style scenario where everybody is fighting to get in a big load lifter suit and wreak havoc on everyone else.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
It's silly fun.
Yes.
Basically, it's not a serious scenario at all, but it's a big challenge, right? Trying to find a way to incorporate. You can play it from 2 to 4 player. Trying to find a scenario that you can play from 2 to 4 player that incorporates the models that are in that terrain. All of the models in the pre-order is quite an interesting challenge. So I'm actually quite proud of it. I think it works very nicely.
Good. That sounds cool. And you said you're going to be doing more scenario packs going forward. Is that what it is?
Yes, definitely. So I think. I mean, I don't want to. Write this in stone. But I think every wave we will do the same thing of releasing the wave models individually for people who just want to play with the model from their faction, and for people who've got all of the factions, or in fact you don't need the other factions in order to play the scenario. But for people who are interested in playing those scenarios, they can buy either as a pre-order or a limited amount of a scenario pack that involves all of them. All of the models from each wave.
Okay. Let's. Even though we've been taking questions from the chat, if you guys have got any questions for James, now is the opportunity to ask them. So please do fire them over.
They're blue.
What was that? Sorry.
I said they're blue. Just in case anybody asks the obvious question.
Right. Okay. With you. But so we've got you to sort of tease a few little things. Is there anything else about the future that you might want to share now that you're a little bit more relaxed on?
So this, I've had that much truth serum. So I think it's no great secret that I've been working on. It isn't ready for release yet, but I've been working on a expanded pack of effect cards. So the effect cards are things which they're available to download on the website. There are currently only 7 of them. Anybody who backed the game at Kickstarter will have got the hard copies, but we'll be releasing an expanded effect card deck. Effect cards are one-shot abilities that cost a small points amount. So that annoying thing where you're trying to fill 125 points and your ideal list is 121 points and you can't buy a model for 4 points. What do you spend it on? Well, the answer is you spend it on effect cards. Remember, you have them by holding them in your hand, because I constantly end games not using them because I forget I bought them. But at some stage in the game, they're a little bit of luck mitigation when you really need it, when you really need to make that dodge, or when you really need to get an extra little bit of movement to score an objective, or something like that. So there's going to be a lot more choice. At the moment, there are 7. We're going to release a deck that will have another at least 25 of those. And it will also have, possibly in excess of the 25, it'll have some cards which it may have. This is a playtesting thing at the moment that I'm looking at it. I think it's viable. Ways of allying in models from friendly factions that are not Wayfarers and are not your own faction. So the Artifactors and the Militia are friendly. They're kind of the good guys a little bit, while the Firm and the Bondsman are friendly. They're kind of the bad guys. So potential for Bondsman to pay a little bit extra, let's say, 2-3 points, and take Hosk in with them. So again, in a very controlled way, trying to add a little bit of list building versatility there, giving you access to stuff that you wouldn't normally have access to, but that you would be paying for. In order to get that extra tactical options. It costs you a little bit more than it would than the native faction, and we might even be able to, at this early stage, squeeze in a few extra leader cards, maybe some faction specific ones, maybe some neutral ones. So that's something that's coming, which I think is needed in the game. I think one of the things that's fun about the game is that there's a fairly high randomness element that your probability is it's usually no better than 75%. So things will go wrong at the worst possible time, but you will have an opportunity to really pare down that luck and play a card that's cost you some points, where you can shore that 75% chance up even further when you really, really need it.
Great, that sounds a great idea. Just going to the chat. So Snowyak, yes, you did do a huge list yesterday, and thank you so much. Unfortunately, the tech has failed us in that regard. So can you start writing your sort of questions normally, I'm afraid. So let's go here. So will there be more games in the world of the Drowned Earth?
Right. You sure these aren't leading questions? So I am working on something at the moment at the same time as I'm doing a lot of design work at the moment. I'm working on these effect card the effect card deck. Obviously I've got Wave 2 to think about as well. What kind of models are we going to go with Wave 2? And it won't be all of Wave 2, but one theme in Wave 2 is some slightly cheaper characters that aren't as versatile as the existing ones, that are only really good at one thing, but they do that one thing very well. And you get a big discount in order to gain access to that. I am working on one idea that I've got relatively far along the road. How much do I want to say? Okay, I'm going to say more than I should because truth serum. But I'll caveat the whole statement by saying that I'm never going to publish a game that I'm not proud of, and I don't know whether I'm proud of it until it's almost finished. And so if I finish designing a game and I'm like, nah, it's okay, but it's not great, I just won't release it. So everyone can help by volunteering to playtest at some stage in the future, I think. But I'm working on a Drowned Earth adventure card game, which will be a kind of again, very narrative, path-driven story where you're sent off on a particular mission, and it'll be a little bit fighting fantasy, choose your own adventure style of game with various challenges, various routes to victory, various ways of developing your characters. And so I'm working on that at the moment. As I say, it might never come to light, but you might see it depending on how good I think it is. And there are I've got so many ideas. I think it's probably going to be a while before I design a game that isn't set in the Drowned Earth. I think we're probably going to see a couple before I stray and go and do something elsewhere. But at the same time, I don't want any of these activities to take away from the miniatures game, which is my main priority. And I want it to be something that's really engaging for players. I want it to change is maybe a bit of a dangerous word. I want it to become deeper and more rich, not necessarily change in its core nature, but certainly, I want to give people more toys to play with, effectively.
Excellent. Question: organized place. How is the organized play system developing, and how will the events affect the future of the game?
So the organized play system, in fact, if you win organized play, you get this, which is a Troodon Alpha, which these will be on general release in about a year's time with a profile card. And you can only imagine what an alpha profile dinosaur might do for the normal dinos. But let's just do a little size comparison. That's a normal Troodon, and that's the alpha. So the only way to get one of these at the moment is to win a tournament or to be a Wayfarer. Wayfarers, it's a familiar name for people, I guess, because one of the factions is named after the Wayfarers. But the Wayfarers is our ambassador program, I guess you call it. So if you are looking to grow the game in your local area, you want to spread the word, you want to give demos, you want to organize events and tournaments, then hit me up on Facebook, send a message to the facebook.com/the Drowned Earth. Send me a message saying that you're interested in signing up, and you will then be in charge of organized play events, and the organized play event is tournament style, so it's a win-lose, a ranking system. But within that ranking system, it's highly narrative. So the tournament itself takes place over a number of different games, and those games thematically dovetail into each other in order that every player, as they leave the tournament, will have a little narrative story of what they did, what their guys did, and what the resolution of it was. On the winner of each final table will open a little envelope which gives you a little multiple choice adventure, which again is thematically connected or narratively connected to the games that you've played. So the whole event tells a little story, and at the end the winner decides what they want to do. They're given a meaningful choice. Those meaningful choices are then sent to the tournament organizer, who records the popular vote, effectively, of that choice for that given event. And then at the end of the year, we will look at all of the choices that were made in all of the events and work out what really happened. And that will actually feed back into the storyline of the game. The fluff will move forward, and it will move forward in a narrative way informed by what the players decided to do. And we're going to have a big end of year event which again will move the story on depending on what people decided to do. And then that end of year event, the top table at that end of year event, will make another meaningful choice for that story, and also possibly for their faction as well, which will feed back into the fluff. And that sort of player feedback into the world is something which is dear to my heart, and which I sort of consider to be great fun, but also really important.
Yeah, that sounds really great. That's good. Okay, Burston was asking, any notes on mounted Limosk? Will he ride a dactyl like his people normally tend to?
No, but you've read the rulebook. Excellent. You've read the fluff in the rulebook. No, he won't be riding a dactyl, but there will be a mounted version of him at some stage in the future. I'm going to give a clue as to what he might be riding. There's another one of the mounted leaders. One of the leaders, well, he's the only leader. He's the only leader of the starting 4 factions that doesn't yet have a mounted version. One of the others has a trophy from Limosk. They have a rivalry, and this is something which is going to come out in the fluff in the future. But that might give you an idea of what kind of creature he will end up riding.
So, Snowyak, have you worked it out? Because you're going, yes. Have you worked it out? Tell, because you obviously know more about it than I do. So,
complete poker face. I won't react.
What, a Triceratops?
This is good Scotch.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Moving on. There's so many questions coming on in here. Unfortunately, Ado has unfortunately had to go, but he was asking, have you ever thought about a theme song? I have a suggestion, but I think that's a bit of a private joke on the channel. Maybe we'll do it at the end.
Okay.
So Snowyak is asking, will the curtain on the event that caused the downfall of the world ever be released?
Possibly. I think it'll be quite some time. There's a reason for keeping it mysterious, I think, which might not. Do
you know what it is then? Have you already thought of it? So you already have an idea?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a whole story that I want to tell as the fluff of the game progresses. And so I want to be very controlled about the way I release that sort of information, because I think that there are various reasons why people don't know what it is, but also reasons why it's more interesting to slowly discover lots of things about what happened and what went on and why, which would be quite obvious if you knew the reason for what was the event.
Okay. No, that sounds good. Snow is basically, take your time, I'll keep following. Keeps interesting and not knowing too much. So yeah, that's good. I'm just trying to go through here. So yes, everybody in the chat went yippee as soon as the Scotch came out. Don't give away all the secrets. Then make a card game. But now we know that potentially a card game could be in the works, so we're all good for that.
Well, I think I'd say that there will definitely be a card game at some stage. Will it be the card game I'm working on at the moment? Who knows? I have to say I'm feeling reasonably positive about what I'm working on at the moment, but you never know.
I think, as you rightly say, I think it's a good attitude on it, is that if it's not right, it doesn't happen. There's no point releasing something that you don't 100% behind.
You see a lot of game companies, I think, release something, it's incredibly popular, and then they try to capitalize on the popularity by churning stuff out, And they kind of missed the point of why the first thing was really popular. And it wasn't just magic. It was because the first thing was really well considered. And I don't want to say, oh, people like the Drowned Earth, cha-ching, let's just churn out a whole load of rubbish with the name on it. It's not my style, and I think it's not a sensible move, even if it was, to be honest.
Okay. RPG ?
Really like to do that. I'd really like to do that. It's it's a lot of work to do it right. I think is a lot of work. And I probably don't have the resources to do it the way that I would like to do it at the moment. But I think it's a very attractive idea to me. But it won't be anytime soon, I think.
Okay. Saber Wolf was asking an AI deck for solo play.
So this is actually an idea which I was working on before the Kickstarter, and I had a first draft of an AI deck, but at that time I was trying to release the game as a campaign style of game from the offing, and I realized that I'd really bitten off more than I could chew if I wanted to hold myself to really fastidious standards of making sure that the game was streamlined, unambiguous, didn't have any conflicts, didn't need a million people asking on Facebook, hang on, what happens if this happens while this happens? And I went overboard, I think, even on trying to make the rulebook as clear and as precise as it could be. And that took up so much time that it was obvious that a campaign system wasn't going to be doable in the first iteration, and it was something that I was going to have to do later once I'd built this solid foundation on which to build. And so I will definitely be revisiting the AI deck idea within the campaign system, maybe outside. I mean, I think if you're designing something and it's going to take a fair amount of work to do, it would be silly not to make it as versatile as you could and not make it usable in the campaign system, but also as an optional rule in the normal game as well. So I suspect probably it will be incorporated into the campaign system, but that it will also be usable outside the campaign system too.
So Side Powell is asking AI-controlled dinos, maybe?
Yeah, that's exactly the idea. So originally, one of the challenges that I had originally was that we, in the first, the beta iteration of the game, we also had neutral dudes with guns, people, not just dinos, and so that brings up a whole load of complication when it comes to an AI system. And really, if you're making an AI deck, you kind of need to, or at least the neatest way that I could think of doing it that would be satisfying. And what you want with an AI control system is that the particular creatures or characters which are being controlled behave in a way which seems natural to them. And so it's very difficult to make a single system which will both realistically and in a way which isn't really overly complicated handle somebody who's standing with a gun whose interest is staying in cover and shooting from distance, and somebody who doesn't have a gun or something that doesn't have a gun that's interested is running towards you as fast as possible with sharp teeth and trying to eat your face. So originally I had two AI decks, one for ranged and one for close combat specialists, effectively. But now we've kind of moved away from that sort of generic troop idea, and I've moved. There will be sort of more troop type characters perhaps, but that they will still be named characters rather than sort of multiples, for the moment at least. So I think that makes the AI deck challenge a little bit simpler, and an AI deck which controls dino behavior and possibly has some keywords on it which give a few extra abilities or changes the behavior depending on the dino type.
Excellent. I think obviously during this conversation you've talked about Kickstarter, and the guys are saying here that compliments for the way that you ran the Kickstarter, and that the Kickstarter was flawless, so you seem to get thumbs up from the crowd here on that.
Well, it's always really nice to hear. I nearly killed myself during that Kickstarter. I'm glad that it went as well as it did, because I put an awful lot of work into making sure it ran as smoothly as possible, and that I was as communicative as possible, and gave people a reason to trust me effectively, because I mean that's what Kickstarter's about, right? It's a big you're asking people to trust you with their money, and there's no guarantee that they'll deliver. And actually, I think the instances of non-delivery are really, really small. But it's certainly something that people worry about, and understandably, it's not a particularly easy feeling to hand somebody a bunch of money and just expect them to do the right thing. And we've all heard the sort of stories of projects which don't deliver at all. Unusual, I think, but occasional. Projects which deliver, but they don't deliver the quality level that they said they were going to, and all of these sorts of things. Games which just turn out not to be very good games because they didn't design the game before they went to Kickstarter and they rushed it through. That was never going to be me. It's not the way I do things. But it was really humbling to see how many people got the message that I was trying to get across, which was, this is me, this is what I want to do, this is what I am going to do, and I am going to do it.
All right. I'm going to there's a question that says, what was the one thing in the game you were most proud of or loved the most? But I just want, before you answer that, just because we were talking about the Kickstarter and about your sort of your mindset on the product that you were producing, something that Pascal was painting up Kalhana on Monday, and he complimented the fact that it was a multi-part miniature, and of course he deals with many miniatures such as that, but he found it one of the easiest to put together because of how thoughtful the socket and ball joints were on the various parts. Is this a conscious decision from you in your sort of design process?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something which one doesn't like to blow one's own trumpet, but I've been getting better at, because when you start off, you're used to gluing miniatures together yourself, and so you've got some idea about how it should work and what would be easy and what have you, but you don't understand the casting process, and you don't understand the sculpting process, and you don't understand the sort of niceties, and as I have been gaining experience of working with artists and working with my caster, and really getting more of an intuitive understanding of the way that those things work, I've been making, I think, more efficient cuts, and cuts which are easier to assemble and that sort of stuff. So I'm actually, despite the fact that this model comes in 7 parts, I think he goes together really, really easily. I'm very proud of the fact that that's a 1-part model. Right. My caster isn't so happy with me, but he gets paid. He's fine. That's a 2-part model, and then the Troodon are 2-part models, and they don't have tiny little components. Effectively, what happens? In fact, I think I can show you on the bigger one. Again, it's just, you know, getting your head around the ideas. What's the most efficient way to design this and to put it together? So that's the body. And the little one's cut in exactly the same way. And then you've got this other piece, which is the fore and aft leg. And they just kind of slot in together and pretty much dry fit, actually. Well, no, apparently they don't dry fit. But, you know, these things are just, I guess, unless you're some kind of high-level genius, you're never going to think of it first time. But you know, second or third time you do the same thing, you just start to see a better way of doing things. And so I hope as things go forward, the cuts and the assembly will be better and easier. There are a few models in the original Kickstarter models, the first 20, which are the Artifactors, Bondsman, Militia, and Firm, which are, some are easier than others, some are fairly simple, but I was learning, basically.
No, well, Pascal was very appreciative and complimentary of the design choice behind Carl Hanna, so thumbs up on that one for sure. Okay,
well, I was just going to say I'll also mention that to James, the sculptor, because he was part of that whole process as well.
Great. So going back then to the question, because I wanted to remember where it was.
Yep.
So what was the one thing in the game you were most proud of or loved the most?
Oh, that's really hard. This is really broad, but I think I'm most proud of the world building. I think that I'm, as much as I'm proud of the game design, I think that it works well, and I think it does. When in your mind you have a design brief and you say, I want the game to do X, Y, Z, and W, and then you show the game to people, and without prompting them, they say, I like that because it does X, Y, Z, and W, then you know you did what you aimed to do. So just in a very broad sense, I feel pleased that people can see what I was trying to do, and apparently I did in the much broader sense. I'm very, very proud of the artistic design of the whole game. I think the aesthetic, the way that the game comes across, just looking at the rulebook, looking at the artwork, you know, the rulebook, I did the graphic design myself, the website I did myself, the artwork, obviously I'm nowhere near talented enough to do that sort of thing, so that was a commission job, so, you know, sort of project management effectively. It really visually communicates what I was trying to get across, and so I'm definitely proud of that. Again, it's a little bit broad. I think all the things I'm proud of are really broad. I was about to say the sort of this is kind of specific. One of the things that you get in an RPG that you don't get in a miniatures game is that granulation of success. In a miniatures game, it's usually binary. You're like, yeah, I did the thing or I didn't do the thing. I hit or I missed. In the Drowned Earth, you've got several different subtleties of doing that. You pass, you nail it, or you feat. Then you
One
nail
second,
it,
James.
you do the best. Yep.
Hang on. Just because we just got audio error there for a second. Are we
okay?
Just talk for a second. Yeah, it's okay. Right. Sorry. Do you want to just start again with that? Yeah.
Do you? Where did I start? Do you remember?
You were talking about the granular sort of nature of success on.
Yeah. So in an RPG, you've got success is granularized in a lot of RPGs because you can say that you do something well, you do it really well, and the GM is there to, or the DM if you're a Dungeons and Dragons player, I guess the DM is there to interpret that result and to say, okay, well, this is what happens. Mechanically, when there is no arbiter of success, it's just the rules. You have a binary success system, you pass or fail. And then some games have the critical success and critical fail. And we've got that extra step of you pass, which means that you do the thing, or you nail it, which means that you do the thing really well, or you critical success, which means that you do the thing really well and you get an extra activation or an extra action as well at the end of it. And I think that gives again a really kind of narrative feel to the game, and I'm quite proud of it. I think it's not something that you see in a lot of games, and I think that probably the reason why I'm proud of it is because it's such a neat resolution, because the same dice mechanic drives the movement, the shooting, the revealing people from stealth, lots of different things, and it was a very stable base from which to build a game which you can do some really complicated stuff, but without having to engage in complicated mechanics.
Right. You once spoke about general henchmen. Are you still planning that?
So it's not an immediate plan. It might be something that I revisit. It's certainly not something that I've ruled out. It's just something which I've said I definitely like the idea, but it isn't in the immediate plans. And that's mainly because it's nothing against the idea in itself. It's just that I think that we would benefit from more diversity of characters to begin with, and then I think that if we had sort of henchmen or mooks or generic unnamed soldiers, they would probably be available within the context of, if you take this character, this opens up the opportunity to get these different generic models. So, for example, in the Artifactors, you hire Anna, and Anna allows you to hire from 0 to 3, dudes, whatever they are. So it would still be in a very controlled way, and it would be something that only happened within the context of hiring particular characters. There might be particular types of generic mooks, soldiers, which were available to a number of different characters. But I try to keep the scale down. And the reason for that is that we've already got dinos adding numeric diversity to the lists. So you can get up to 12, 14 characters, things like that. When in a game like Drowned Earth, where you have fairly deadly shooting, having lots of guns on the table does not necessarily a fun game make. But hiring a whole load of mooks who don't really have a very significant impact on the game is also not that great. So we'll see how it works in the future. I think the dinosaurs are already a proof of concept that unnamed sort of multiple purchase models work within the context of the Drowned Earth, but I think it's something that would change the character of the game quite significantly. And so it isn't something that we've been actively. I sort of play tested it a while ago and put it on the shelf and said, this is one for the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I, on my limited knowledge of the game, I probably would agree. I think more dinosaurs are more colourful and add to the flavour of the game, whereas mercenary troops of no name don't really do anything, and you become another of a similar game out there.
And I think also it's back to the same thing of breadth versus depth. That kind of adds breadth rather than depth, and I'm more interested at the moment in giving people a wide range of different characters that they can use, which bring up tactical options rather than getting the game bogged down with just too many. It's like I was saying right at the beginning of keeping the game at skirmish scale, and not lulling people into this idea that you can just buy a box with 5 models in it and play the game competitively. But actually, the truth is you buy your 5 models and then realize you need to buy another 20 in order to really have a competitive game. It's not what I want to do. So if I was going to, and it's not a foregone conclusion, but when it comes to generic troop types, that's a danger. And so you need to be very mindful of the way that you handle that kind of thing when you're introducing that sort of idea to the game.
Okay. There's a couple of people who have asked, so we'll just put it under one umbrella. Events. What are your event plans for the next few months into next year? Shows, UK, international?
So over the Christmas period, there aren't too many shows and events. I'm looking at the idea of doing a kind of demo tour of just going to shops and, sort of local. It'll definitely be domestic. There'll be UK ones, but going to shops and demoing the game and trying to do a kind of, sort of rock star tour of the country, weekend by weekend.
You just want a tour bus, don't you?
Pretty much, yeah. A tour bus, some dolly birds, whiskey on tap, that. Yeah, it's really not like that, sadly. Yeah, that's something we're definitely looking at. But the show season kind of starts in the second quarter of the year. So there's Salute, and in America there's Adepticon. There's definitely going to be an event happening at Adepticon. I don't know if I'll be able to attend it. I would certainly like to. It's quite close to Salute. But one of the wayfarers out in the States is going to be running an event at Adepticon, and I know a couple of the American guys are going to be out there, hopefully running possibly the first American official tournament, which would be good. But if I can make it, I definitely will. I'd love to get out there. Scheduling wise, it can be a bit difficult, but we'll see.
I certainly shall be going to Salute next year and doing my live filming, and then of course to the UK Games Expo. So that's my 2 big events for next year.
Well, so I think we'll be at Salute, but rather in previous years we've gone just running demos on a demo table. I think this year we're going to be going in partnership with Element Games and running demos on their stand, because one of the things that I always feel a bit bad about at Salute is people. They have a demo, they say, yep, this is great, and again, it worked very well at Essen. I would like to buy your game, please sell it to me. And you say to them, well, this is a demo stand and we're not allowed to sell anything here, but if you walk halfway across the hall back the way you came, then you can buy it from Element Games. And that doesn't make any kind of sense. So the much more sensible way to do it is for us to be giving demos with Element Games, and then when people want to buy the game, they literally just have to walk 2 steps behind the demo table to pick up whatever it is they want to buy. So that's probably what we'll be doing.
Okay, great. Just looking here. So Snowyak's asking, Forek is obviously based on the Governator. Are there more models based on pop culture examples?
What's the Governator? So I'll tell you exactly what Forek's based on. He's basically Arnie from Predator, but the dwarf version. But Drowned Earth dwarves are called Dverg. They don't necessarily have to have big bushy beards, because I sort of feel like dwarves can also probably shave if they want to, which they certainly do in the Drowned Earth, because it's 42 degrees a lot of the time, and a beard in that sort of weather is not much fun, unless you're Ando. But I think Ando is well known for being a complete psychopath, and Venk as well. Venk is also a psychopath. So generally, I think the rule is Dverg with beards in the Drowned Earth, they're possibly mentally slightly unstable.
But as far as characters being sort of inspired by, I mean, the visual similarity of for it is very much Arnie sort of looking. So, are there any other characters? Is there something? Was that a conscious decision? Saying I want Arnie but smaller.
It was a very conscious decision, and in fact, the militia in general are very much, I would say, a mashup of the original cast of Predator and the cast of Aliens, the second Alien film. And so I think Arnie is probably, a sort of direct influence. All of the other characters in the militia are kind of mashups.
Yuck was asking, don't forget about my pirate question. So you're going to have to remind us what the pirate question was, so we can ask. I can ask it to James because
he's a bad man. Okay, so I might have let slip at Essen that I really love pirates, and that originally I had an idea of a pirate faction because that would be great, but the problem with that again is what we were back to before about breadth versus depth, and I think that now is definitely the time for depth, but I'm not going to give up on the pirate idea. And so I think maybe a way to handle that is that whatever the campaign system looks like, it will definitely involve some miniatures, and maybe what we do is have two completely new factions which can act as mercenaries, but only for particular factions. So, for example, if we say that the artifactors and the militia are the good guys, then the pirate faction would be the good mercenaries, and there would also be bad mercenaries. And what that means is that we'd release a campaign product that would have a pirate faction in it that could be played standalone as pirates, but that those models would also break down and act as mercenaries for either the militia or the artifactors.
Right. Yes, Snorriak's instantly gone to Waterworld, which so we need Kevin Costner in it somewhere, don't we?
Waterworld is a guilty pleasure. I'll admit that. Kevin Costner, not so much.
Oh, excellent. So WTF Online's come on saying need to lurk, but another great interview, Monkey. So we'll catch up on when the video is posted. So that's excellent. And yes, we'll have the video up on YouTube hopefully for tomorrow.
Great stuff.
Cat's edited out.
Oh yeah, good. That's handy that you get a bit of intervention between them.
Yeah. So chat, any sort of final questions for James, because we've been keeping you talking non-stop here. But it's been such great material, and we're getting such an awesome insight into the game, and the game is as lush with the narrative as the actual environment is, which is awesome.
Well, I've certainly really worked hard to to make it as rich and interesting as possible, because I guess it's a lot of work, and really to do the thing at all is a lot of work. So to do the thing as well as you possibly can is only slightly more work than just doing it at all. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people say, what about copyright issues? And, do people steal each other's game ideas and, those sorts of things? And obviously some of that happens, but the honest truth is that plagiarizing somebody else's game is as much work as, or almost as much work as writing your own. So it just doesn't really apply as much, I guess.
Okay. It's nice how, because I look at the questions, and it's testament to the game, but a lot of these questions are about the narrative, about the characters, as opposed to rule or design based questions, and I really like that. So Snow is asking, will there be a romantic relationships between characters?
Possibly, yeah. And I mean, so I think anyone who's taken the time to look at the game has probably noticed it's something that a few people observed during the Kickstarter, which honestly I didn't really do very consciously, but it's just a natural way of doing things for me. There's a fair amount of diversity of different I've tried to make as close to a 50-50 gender split and that sort of thing, and I'm a big fan basically of representing the world in the way it really is, and so I know it's a kind of hot political issue of there are lots of people of color or different gender splits, too many or not enough of one particular gender or another, or what's people's sort of sexual alignment or gender alignment, or all of these things. And as far as I'm concerned, as a sort of citizen of the world and somebody who is a big fan of people being able to be themselves and do what they want to do, it seems quite natural to me to be representative of everything. What I don't like, I think, in culture in general is when you can hear the gears grinding, and so I think a lot of these when it comes to representing people's relationships and sort of love and sexual relationships, it can be quite fraught with political stuff that I just don't really understand. And so I think I would only approach that kind of material if I felt I could be representative. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
And so, yes, but I think it's not the main story.
Mm-hmm.
If you understand what I mean.
Maybe it's new enough fan fiction, isn't it? Maybe that.
Yeah, I mean, I know exactly what you mean, and certainly as in my mind, I understand the characters in my game as the full gamut of different people. I think there are in the fluff there are a few kind of there are a few clues as to what and who people are and what they like, what they don't like, their opinions, their preferences, and all of the rest of it. And I sort of feel it's necessary to write those things in, but not make a big deal out of them, or at least make a big deal out of all of it equally.
Okay. Burston is asking, can we expect models from the other minor sentient races in the Drowned Earth?
Yes, definitely. There will, in the next wave, there will definitely be at least one model from. So I think to explain to anybody who doesn't have the hard copy rulebook, the existing races, which are human, Barangi, Dverg, and Saurian, make up about 75 or 80% of the population of Ulaya. And the other, the rest is made up of a dizzying array of different races, which nobody can, there isn't any sort of demographic information because the world just isn't like that. It's there are places which are too remote. There are places which are which have almost all some particular obscure species which you don't actually find anywhere else in Ulaya. And so although I definitely want to make sure that the range reflects the main races enough that people have. Okay, let's be honest. Everybody wants an all Barangi crew, right? I know I do. I'm not sure it will be that great in game because they'll all be very expensive. But that's something which, you kind of need to work towards to some degree. But beyond that, I think it's also really a nice idea to represent that kind of diversity of. I've got so many cool race ideas. I just don't want to make the world. I don't want to get too excited about making models for all of the races that I've thought of, which are really cool. I think that the range should represent the world effectively.
Okay. Will there be some underwater rules in the future?
That's a really tricky one. And I think I'm confident to say, so in the alternate rules so I already talked about swing points. There's something very similar underwater where effectively you can kind of ride a current and go through an underwater tunnel or go through, take advantage of an eddy, which brings you up into another part of the map. And so that's something which is completely doable within the existing rule set. I think that underwater rules in the wider sense is a little bit difficult. It requires extra scenery and things like that, which again, I don't feel it's fair to expect that of people within a tournament environment. And so I'm looking at ways of making, in narrative scenarios, making the idea of diving underwater and finding things work within the existing mechanics and not requiring extra scenery. So hopefully there might be ways of telling that story without necessarily representing it with models on a table.
Okay.
Is that a bit cryptic? I hope it was. It was meant to be.
Yeah. Yes. Because again, if we use the sort of the Tolkien Lord of the Rings movie analogy, if the action is happening above ground, that's where the line is. This is now diverging away from that.
Yeah.
But we want to experience it, so maybe it's something separate. Maybe it's a card-based element and dice rolls associated to that, but it's not the mainstay of the game.
Yeah, some way of representing it, just without requiring it to be traditional miniatures rules, because also, I mean, just the physics of the world don't work underwater, leaping and what have you. So then you have to write an entire different movement set, and effectively you have to write an entire new game for that small amount of time that you're spending underwater, and it doesn't seem feasible to do that within the context of the existing game. But, as you point out, there are probably ways of doing it which where I think the word is abstracted. You can make those things happen, but they're happening in a much more abstracted way than you're used to on the tabletop.
I maybe you're aware of this, or maybe I'll be putting my foot into it. Here we go. I remember Games Workshop did Dungeon Quest, and they did an expansion called Catacombs, and it was card-based, and it did exactly that. The action was happening on top, but you would do a series of cards, and depending on how many cards you picked up, that was the distance you moved, and then there was a dice modifier to whether you deviated left or right or say center. Right.
Interesting. Yeah.
There we go. See. It's just a knowledge of old games of the past. Okay, so just looking here. Oh, so May, well, welcome to the chat, May. Will you be doing humanoid rat models?
Well, there's a term for those. Nezumi, I think, is what I was looking for. Probably not, I think. So an interesting thing about the Drowned Earth in general is that in a world which is tropical, a lot of creatures which evolved after... how to put this succinctly? Mammals didn't do as well after the event, and so the trees, there are still birds, but a lot of sort of pterosaur type animals started to do a bit better, and I think you still occasionally find a leopard or a panther in the jungle, but because they're extremely versatile animals, but they've almost been pushed out of their niche by predators of the same type, kind of ambush predators, which are just better suited to that kind of environment. And so that's an interesting thing after the event, the climate change and in the context of the revival of a lot of prehistoric species that then find themselves in an environment which they were really evolved to operate within, which mammals did survive, or which, non-dinosaur animals did survive and managed to thrive within that environment, and which were outperformed by creatures which went extinct millions of years ago, but went extinct because their niche changed.
It's amazing to listen to you that you've fought through that whole sort of process, because as a gamer, or somebody else might just go, yeah, I want to have cool rat people in my game, but you're saying no, the rats died out. Yeah. I think it's really important. If you want to create some sense of authenticity, then you need to think all of these things through and sort of contextualize them. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to just say out to the chat if there are any last questions, but while we're waiting for those to maybe come through, James, is there anything that you wanted to say to the chat in a sort of a wrap-up sort of style? Have we covered pretty much everything, or have we missed anything?
I think we've sort of hit all the high points. I mean, thank you to you. This has been a great month so far, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it progress. I'm really looking forward to seeing your Let's Play video. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure to sponsor the Twitch stream. I think that what you do is super professional, and I'm very impressed, and I've really enjoyed the content so far.
Well, thank you so much, and it's been a real delight to learn about your game, and now I'm sort of speaking to you in person just to see how passionate about it, the amount of depth that there is there to the game. I certainly look forward to seeing what some of these future releases will be, and spending more time in the world. And that was one of the things that I did recognize about the game, and Snowyak was the person who sort of put me in this direction. And when I was thinking I want to have a channel game, one that I can always fall back on, of all the many games that I have seen, this was the one that sort of spoke to me the loudest. So it has been great to feature you this month, but I can absolutely guarantee that this relationship will be continuing for a long time to come, because it's a game I want to play, and I want to play more of and develop.
Well, I look forward to it, and I wonder if maybe some of the campaign ideas that I'm coming up with. Yeah, you said, is there anything else I'd like to talk about? And there is something. Quickly, we'll sort of wrap it up, but what I was going to say immediately was that maybe we can, at some stage I'll head up to you and we can do some live streaming of some of the more narrative scenarios or something like that.
That'd be amazing.
But world exclusive, I think I mentioned it in passing to a few people, but there's no official announcement. We're going to be running a winter campaign, which I hope is going to start in December, and this is going to be an online event. It won't be a full campaign event in the sense that I'm planning for a proper release, but what it will be is a series of interconnected narrative scenarios where players at home can submit their results, and the results, both of the overall games but also the sort of faction leaderboards, will define a few story snippets. There are a few bits of the plot that I want to reveal to people, and the sort of winners and losers of the various stages of this winter campaign, which is going to be a narrative event which tells a given story. I won't say too much about it now, but the twists and turns will inform the way the story goes. So this is a recurring theme. You'll see by now this is my style, but also the way that different factions perform, and we'll do some user polls as well. I think will determine what information we reveal about certain characters that exist in the world now, and possibly even the way they interact with each other.
Wow, that sounds really good. Okay. Ooh, it's just so much to look forward to, isn't it?
Hope so, yeah. I just need to get my act together.
Yeah, stop talking to us, get writing. Brilliant. Okay, well, I think, yes, we should definitely let you go. But so thank you so much for spending this evening talking to myself and to the chat. It's been a real pleasure.
Most welcome.
Thoroughly enjoyed learning more of the depth of the Drowned Earth, and yeah, I can't wait to see future releases and just see where the story takes us over the coming sort of months. It's fascinating. It's brilliant. And I guess we'll wrap it up there then.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And yeah, look forward to doing this again sometime.
You'd be very welcome, yes. Whenever you want to jump on, tell us something new, then you're more than welcome. Okay, so thank you so much, James, and have a good evening.
Will do.
Bye-bye for now, then. Okay, then, and so there we go. That was our live interview with James Baldwin, the designer of The Drowned Earth. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Bye-bye for now.